Yeah, so the sound is on. So I'm listening to.
The intro is cool.
Yeah.
Welcoming everybody. All the partners. Legislative reception. So a lot here. Got one other thing.
Yes. So it's in many ways it doesn't accelerate on the stage.
Yeah, that's cool. You guys ready?
No, it's all.
Yeah. Yes.
No, I have back here later on. I have there.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to London Climate Week. And welcome also to our home here. I'm Chris Bradshaw. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for Bentley Systems, and it's our pleasure to host you all here this morning. I hope everybody has a great event. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. First, the ladies' room, restroom, bathroom is where, right there. Men's is on the other side of the lobby. And then our fire exit is in the same direction as the women's room. So if the fire alarm does go, that's where we want to go. That's the nearest one. There's a second one further down the hall. There are no fire drills planned for today. So if the fire alarm does go off, we need to exit. With that, again, thank you all for coming and welcome. And it's my pleasure to introduce Seth Schultz, CEO of Resilience Rising. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
great to be here. Welcome if some of you have traveled like myself for London Climate Week. Welcome and big thanks to Chris and Bentley Systems for hosting us today. Spectacular venue. If you haven't had a chance to look out those windows, you should. As Chris said, my name is Seth Schultz. I'm the CEO of Resilience Rising. we're one of the managing partners of Resilience Hub. I'll come on to that more in a minute, but yeah, thank you for being here. We've got a really exciting program. I want to walk through a little bit of what we're here to do today. But before I do want to mention the other kind of managing partners of the Resilience Hub. If you don't know who they are, there's 6 of us that kind of coordinate this, bring together different communities and organizations all around the world every year at COP. Those organizations are the Atlantic Council, Adrian Arsh Rockefeller Foundation, Fundación Avina, Global Resilience Partnership, the International Center for Climate Change and Development, Slum Dwellers International, and South-South North. And it's been a really exciting partnership that we've been working together to have the Resilience Hub. This is the first time that we're doing it not at COP. So COP, the Conference of Parties, it's the big kind of climate convening for the United Nations. We did this for the first time in Glasgow. At that point, there had never been a single place at COP to talk about resilience. This is the 3rd year we've been doing it. We did it in Sharm el-Sheikh. We did it as well in Dubai. And this year, we're kind of taking it on the road. So we're here at Climate Week. We'll also be at Climate Week in New York City. And then we'll be at COP29 later this year. Now, if you're not familiar with the Hub, or this is your first time at a Hub event, why we set this up is to drive the conversation, the agenda around resilience. So it's place locally informed, equitable, resilient solutions with people and nature at the heart of the COP process. We're also amplifying local voices for the most vulnerable and climate affected through kind of incorporation of these regional hubs. So one of the other kind of issues that we're trying to address is a lot of people don't have access to go to COP every year. It can be the passes are limiting, the cost can be prohibitive. So we've created these regional hubs to allow people to participate remotely from different parts of the world, and part of the managing partners that work on all of this create those opportunities and those programs for engagement throughout the process, and we hear different perspectives during COP. It's really kind of exciting. And we're really proud of how much this community has grown. Last year's Hub, we had 15,000 visitors in person and online. And I should give a shout out for the people joining us today online as well. Thank you for participating. And we now count almost 20,000 people who follow us or subscribe to our content. And we've done this in just 3 short years. So if it wasn't clear that there was a need to talk about resilience and adaptation, I think it is pretty clear now. Now, I mentioned some of what we're doing this week and again later in the summer at New York, but really what we're trying to discuss today is a whole society approach to climate action, building resilience and equitable communities. Everybody knows in the room, I hope, that the time to act on the climate crisis is rapidly closing. And in particular, no one and no organization can do it on their own. And I think at the core, the managing partners of the Hub deeply believe that, and it's through that collaboration and the sectoral approach that we see an opportunity to radically accelerate the implementation, education, awareness, and impact, particularly around resilient communities. So I'll skip to kind of getting right to the heart of this, but I guess one of the other things I wanted to mention before we do that, that I hadn't yet, is that the Hub is also the home to the Race to Resilience. And we've had great partners in the Champions team. You hear some of them today who are going to be collaborating and talking about the work that we've been doing. We were one of the very first collaborations for Resilience Breakthrough with them. They've been fantastic partners on all of this, and Resilience Hub is home to the Race to Resilience campaign. So very glad for that collaboration participation as well. So without further ado, I'm looking for Daniel Stander. Where's Daniel? He's coming up now. So Daniel's going to do our first panel. Yeah, quick round of applause. If you don't know Daniel, he's fantastic. Daniel's an advisor to the United Nations on Sustainable Finance. He's also the deputy chair of the Resilient Cities Network and has been a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. So Daniel, first panel over to you, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Seth. Appreciate the welcome. I'd just like all the panelists to come up on stage now. We don't need big introductions. Farah, take a seat. Chris, take a seat. Cassie. We have one more panelist who I hope will join us. She told us she's running late. But before we get going, I always like to just check in with the room because, we're not here for us, we're here for people in the room. We can have a conversation all day long, and I want to know what these guys think, what these guys are up to, and I want to understand the level of understanding. So to begin with, I'm going to ask you all to stand up, because I don't want you on your bums the whole time. So up you get. Panelists, so you're included in this. Mahmood, up. You're in this, just hiding at the back. Okay, what I want to do is I want to just check in to see just general levels of understanding. What can I do as the first question? Okay, here's one. 2015 was the year of agreements. There were 4 big agreements. Some people say there were 3, but there were actually 4. If you think you can name 3 of the 4 agreements that were signed in 2015, stay standing. If you don't think you can name 3, sit down. Okay, so that's really, whoa. Okay, so that's, oh my days. Okay, so that, I thought that was the easy first one. Mahmoud even sat down. We've got one person still standing, 2 people. Anybody, is anybody standing? Okay, oh, we do, brilliant. No, stand. All right, that was too hard. Everybody up again, that didn't work. I didn't need to clear out the room. Okay, we're in a technology house. I'm gonna ask a technology question, okay? Just because you're gonna bring up technology and we gotta understand. Okay, if you think you know the difference between AI and machine learning, stay standing. Okay, all right. If you think you know who Eniola is, stay standing. Eniola, you're on the back seat over there, keep coming through. This is Eniola, so you should just stay standing. Everybody stay standing, because you do that. Go and join us on together. Okay, your far side, Eniola, please. All right, last question then. Article 9.4 of the Paris Agreement, seeing as we're in a climate space and we're in a resilient space. Anybody know what 9.4 is all about? Okay, no, I've lost everybody. All right, what were the 3 of the 4 agreements signed in 2015?
2030 agenda.
2030 agenda, global goals. The Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework, and if you want the extra one, it's the Addis Agreement as well. 9.4 is about, this is why we're all here. 9.4 is about equity between mitigation and adaptation. It's about making sure we have equal flows coming into reducing greenhouse gases and building a world that is ready for the world we're in right now. And difference between AI and machine learning, one is a subset of the other, is the short answer. It's a bit of a trick question. Okay, got a sense of where we are in the room? All right, we are here 3 years into the Resilience Hub program, as Seth explained. I think this is a great moment to take stock. We've got some big meetings coming up at the end of this year, and I'm already thinking about Brazil the year afterwards. I want to come out of this conversation some asks, some challenges that the resilience team can take forward to the high-level champions. We've got one in the room at the moment, another is going to be joining us. So that's where I want to take this conversation. I'm not going to do big introductions because I'm hopeful you can all read or see who people are. If anyone is partially sighted or can't read and needs us to say that, then let us know. But I want to start with Eniola. I'm going to start with Eniola because goal 17, which is my favorite goal, was all about collaboration. All the goals are equally important. All of the goals are theme-based. And I'm sure we have our favorites, but they're all important. But without 17, which is about collaboration, we're not going to get anywhere. And this is a conversation about collaboration. We have people on the panel from very, very different parts of the ecosystem. And Eniola, I wanted to start with you because you physically build bridges, but you metaphorically build bridges. And what is it that we need to be doing differently as we reach this halfway point to take this forward?
Well, thank you, Daniel. And my apologies for being a little late.
You were perfectly timed.
Oh, great. Well, that's great. Yeah. So I'm Eniola Mathia-Baga. I am a proponent of partnership. It's sometimes painful, sometimes really great when you kind of like date and you figure out that we can help each other, we're complementary. So for our work at Bridges to Prosperity, we literally, as Daniel said, build bridges in some of the most hardest to reach areas. So it really encourages us in our model to have to work with government, to make sure we're working with government and private sector, who are essentially the builders of last resort there. So we should be essentially working ourselves out of a job in terms of our work. Our work is primarily to facilitate communities, governments, and private sector with tools that we actually used to build quite a lot of our bridges. We've transitioned to working with governments who can do it better, faster, and helping them to do it in more cost-effective ways that are climate smart. And so this means it necessitates us to have those conversations with those market actors early on in this stage. Think about ideation when they're thinking around infrastructure, when they're having conversations with the likes of MCC or the likes of World Bank and others when they're getting the funding to be able to fund infrastructure and think about it smartly. We usually focus on big bridges, beauty projects sometimes, and it really doesn't address the issues of the community. So what does that mean for us practically? It means for us practically that in our work with governments, we have to understand that they have a recognizable constituency, which is the communities. Our proximity to those communities helps us, and the information and data that we get from communities through needs assessments, through literally everything you can see in first principles of engineering we do as a nonprofit. So it means that in our model, we have to have a proximity to the communities, understand their needs, articulate those needs into something that can be addressable, and then quickly be able to close that enlightenment moment for where the government makes a decision. We've been able to, I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out as kind of some of the things that we'll probably discuss is that communities know what they need. It's not a secret. And so I think our role as facilitators is very important in that space, but we also are mindful that some of the infrastructure that is needed is not so tech involved. It's literally a bridge to essential services. And we've done that with 1.9 million people, but there's 1.7 billion people across the world who are dealing with isolation-related poverty. And that's only going to get exacerbated by increased climate issues for communities that are already invisible to those who are supposed to serve. So one of the things I wanted to kind of end with here is, or at least this portion, is that the idea of bundling infrastructure projects, the idea of thinking around how does an individual get from their location to the opportunities that maybe last mile providers, other services provide, to ensure that there is, in the sense of throughput, there's an opportunity for all of those communities to have the agency to ask for what they want, get what they want, and be able to enhance their lives significantly. And there's really no number for that. Like, there's parts of our work that are purely non-commercial. And I think one of the pieces of partnership is to try to de-risk, we're going to talk about this a lot probably today, but try to de-risk the non-commercial but very needed parts of the work that we're involved in. As I said, we want to work ourselves out of a job. We want to hand over the manuals, everything over to the government, and it's involving the communities in that, because they have to be the voice that speaks to their representatives as well.
And thanks for that. So much there that we can pick up on. You started off really by presenting a whole of society response. So I just want to say, I'm not going to do Q&A at the end. You're in this conversation from the beginning. So if you hear something you don't agree with, or you want to make a point, or you want to ask a question, raise your hands and I'll just bring you into this conversation, okay? No speechifying, but just say your name and your affiliation and bring you in. But I heard whole of society responses. I heard agency and redundancy, meaning we want to make ourselves redundant and give agency to others. I heard about flows of capital, but I also heard something about place-based and understanding your community. And that's something that I know is really important to some of the people on the panel. So I don't know whether Farah or Cassie, you want to pick up on that, because I think about what you do, Farah, within the art world, and that is, we're not just talking about civil society and the public sector and the private sector, we're talking about using art more generally to engage community. And Cassie, I know you are deeply wedded to the needs of community. So guys, just pile in as you wish.
Hi everyone, I'm Farah, and I'm the Climate Justice Lead at an organisation called Julie's Bicycle. So for those of you who don't know us, we work very specifically to mobilise the arts and culture sector on climate action. And, there's a multiplicity of approaches that we use. We work very directly with cultural and climate policy makers. We work with arts organisations, arts and cultural organisations in the broadest sense. We work directly with artists on a programme called Creative Climate Leadership, really advancing how we think about climate. And we work in partnership as well across the whole sector. And one of the things that we are really trying to advocate for is the idea of creative approaches to climate action. I think sometimes that we see arts and culture as something that's very decorative to society. It's a luxury. Instead of as something that actually shapes communities, it shapes places, it shapes how we think about, how a building is designed, how a neighborhood is designed, and what we value as well. So all of those things are artistic pursuits, they are cultural pursuits, they are embedded in our language, in our ritual, in the way that we value knowledge as well. When we talk about building community infrastructure and place-based infrastructure, there's a real, I think, a missed opportunity, or currently missing opportunity, to really involve more creative approaches to this. We can't solve the problem with the same thinking that got us into it, right? And there are so many arts and cultural organisations, individuals who are working already on the ground in collaboration all over the world with communities who are really embedded in those communities as well. I think that's the important thing, is that we work in a way that is authentic to the places and the communities that we're engaging with, as any others doing. And it's about understanding the deeply contextualized needs of those communities in order to do something that is relevant, that is how you engage people, the actual community, instead of imposing something that's top down, because that's not sustainable in the long term. And it also means that we can reshape what we value in our communities and in our local neighbourhoods, in our cities as well, in a really different way. There's, for example, there is in Coventry, as part of Coventry City of Culture, there was an arts organisation who we are very engaged with, called Talking Birds, and they ran a citizens' assembly kind of programme that was it's called Art for the People, and it's essentially asking what people needed, or what people wanted to see for the future of the arts in their city. And what happens is, when you have this really engaged, creative approach that is not about reactivity and despair, but actually about engaging people with what they want and their hopes and their dreams and their visions for what their families and what's important to them, is you get these responses that are about, actually, we want more green space, we want more open space like this, we want to design our city like this, and this is how we creatively approach it. So, we ended up with a series of recommendations, which then went through to the council, and they're being implemented and piloted and tested out with those people who were engaged. And I think it's just one example of how this builds really sustainable long-term communities.
As always, Farah, so much there. I really like the positioning of art, not just as something that is consumed, but as something that is authentic, something that comes with tradition, something that is based in community, something that comes with knowledge and indigenous understanding. And that's an important part of how we're going to solve the climate crisis. I'm pleased we have an artist in the room who's going to be on the next panel, so we can build on that. And I know we talked about design and infrastructure and technology, and I know we're going to get to that as well, Chris, but Cassie, I've got to come to you, because a lot of what Farah said, you could say it sounds idealistic, right? That we need to put the needs of the community first, and we can't just be doing top down, but of course, how do we do that in practice? Because it can sound easy, but it isn't.
Yeah, I think it's pretty challenging. I think you're right, but I think it is what we should be aiming for. And I think it's the way of achieving success. So we know that it's possible to fail if the needs of communities aren't built in to good climate action, to city planning, to regeneration. And so yeah, thanks for having me today. I'm Cassie and I come from C40 Cities, which is a network of 96 of the world's largest cities where the mayors have taken a pledge to join C40 and take the most ambitious climate action. And that ambitious climate action touches on mitigation, adaptation, and equity. And we really believe it at C40, there is no climate action that isn't inclusive climate action or equitable climate action. So I think that's a kind of starting point of how do you design that in. We are dealing with the mega cities around the world. So you'd say, well, okay, is that most challenging or does that provide the most opportunities? It could be a bit of both. But we're really seeing great action across these cities. I'll give a few examples in a moment, maybe to bring that to life. I really like Farah's Coventry example, and so where we're seeing similar actions being taken around the world. And the idea of C40 is that if a few cities take an action, then it can be shared with other cities, and hopefully they'll get on with it too, right? And they won't have to start from a blank sheet of paper of designing the action from scratch. But I think firstly, it's important to also say cities are on the front line of climate impacts at the moment. Many cities around the world are also responsible for large shares of the emissions and contribution to climate change, but are experiencing, the increasing intensity and frequency of climate action, as well as in many cases rapidly growing populations. So this isn't to say that cities need most of the action, but of course we know that there's real communities that are suffering there and have huge amounts of vulnerable communities within cities. We know that cities contain lots of inequity within them and from one area to another. So that leads me to then, how can cities do good design?
Mm-hmm.
The thing about a city and a mayor of a city is they know where people are. It's actually a bit easier, in a way, to design a city policy than it is a national one, and particularly one that has people at the heart of it. So lots of cities around the world, for example, have heat risk and vulnerability mapping. They know people who are most vulnerable to the impact of extreme heat and that they're going to grow, whether they're in informal housing or poorly designed housing, or they don't have green space nearby, or they don't have access to cooling. And therefore, that means you can target your interventions effectively. Exactly the same thing applies with air pollution. And you can therefore monitor where the hotspots of air pollution are and really then target your interventions. And ideally have interventions that are targeted on equity, on managing vulnerability, as well as then improving climate action. So let me give a couple of examples to get us just where cities have done some cool stuff. Maybe I'll start with an urban nature program in Freetown in Sierra Leone. But firstly, they came up with a great name for their program, which is Freetown the Tree Town. And don't forget that the name of any policy or program is really important for getting people's buy-in. But the reason that they were looking to plant over 1 million trees in Freetown is because they were suffering from large flooding due to landslides. And so what was happening was land around the city was destabilising. Lots of cities do tree planting, but what was different about Freetown the Tree Town is they engaged the community in that tree planting. So every tree that was planted, there's now around 750,000, was associated with a community person who was going to look after it. And that was all logged on an app, and then that meant that people in the community were therefore looking after the trees, they could see the benefit of it. And it's led to a 75% success rate of the saplings that were grown. Those of you that have ever worked in tree planting know that normally it's about less than 50% of sapling. Some people are nodding, so you'll be better, more experts than me. But that's what I understand is normally you end up with around about a 50% success rate. 75% success rate means two things, doesn't it? One, you've got larger trees growing, going to provide some shade, stabilise the land. That's a good thing. It's also better value for money.
Mm-hmm.
So it means the money in is going to be more accessible. So I think that's one example of a kind of citywide policy, and I'll bring some others into the chat.
In the spirit of logging actions or takeaways, and I know there's a rapporteur in the room who's going to be driving this stuff forward, there's a couple of things there. You need strong local government. We need those voices at the seat, having seats at the table, at the COPs, because of the point you make about actually can sometimes be easier to know your city and to drive change at a local level. There's something else I'd like to see logged, which is it's often very challenging for the local leader. If the local leader comes from the party that is not the leader of the national government, and most cities in the world aren't able to borrow money without a sovereign-backed guarantee. And for political rivalries, that can often mean it's very difficult for a leader, even as strong as Mayor Yvonne Akisoya in Sierra Leone, Freetown, to get the buy-in that they need because of political issues. And something that I would like personally to see taken forward is a means by which we can enable local governments to borrow money to invest in adaptation without the need for a sovereign guarantee. And somebody mentioned de-risking, right? That's going to be that's part of that. There's a reason why we need sovereign-backed guarantees, because it's risky. But can we find other ways to then unlock the capital into a local level and circumvent some political rivalries? I saw a hand, which I'm going to come to in a minute. If there are any other hands catch my eye, Chris, I'll
Just briefly on that point, sorry, I was recently talking to an NDB who requires sovereign-backed guarantees for any city loans. They were like, we've been issuing these now for 20 years. We've never had to call one in.
Right.
But they said, but we still feel like it's too risky to do without them. So I thought that was an interesting point, right? But they had, all this evidence.
I mean, there's a lot of community-based financing that doesn't get done because it's perceived to be very risky, but actually community cooperatives have the least credit default because everybody knows each other and there's this kind of a social fabric there, but it just doesn't look that way. But those guarantees are still required. Anyway, that's the point I would like to see taken forward. Chris, I want to come to you because we heard at the beginning from Eniola about mega projects, but also micro projects. And I think we see technology used in an amazing way now around design and delivery at a mega level, 4D digital twins or whatever. I just think, for me, I see a potential, and I don't know if it's the right turn of phrase or what you would say, but about democratizing that technology somehow. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I certainly do. And so, technology has been used, software technology has been used in all the things we're talking about up here for a long time, 40 years more or more. Back in those days, we called it CAD. Mm-hmm. And think about what that acronym means, right? Computer aided design. The computer's not designing, the computer is aiding the engineer or the architect or the designer in getting their job done. Now, 40 years later, computers have 10 billion times more compute power than they did 40 years ago. So we're not just making blueprints in the computer anymore. We're modeling whole cities. We're modeling whole infrastructure systems. And we're modeling them in a way that allows us to simulate and do analysis so we can understand how humans walk through a train station and understand what the impact of design change. We can bring a new environment to that city or that infrastructure system and see how it responds. 10 centimeters of rain in 24 hours. Does the tube station flood or not, right? So all of this capability exists now. And exactly to your point, if we have multi-billion-dollar mega projects, chances are very good that they have created a digital twin of that project before they even begin, during planning. And they will use it in the design process and they will iterate, carry it into construction and add on, because the way things get built aren't always the way things get designed. And then finally into operations and maintenance, which is where the big bucks are. Now, to keep those digital twins alive, what do? We have constituents in the community updating them with their app. We have IoT sensors that are coming back and telling us about how that system is operating and flowing. So that digital twin is alive, and it allows us to continue to simulate and analyze whether it's the environment or it's a what if scenario or it's understanding community impact or what have you. So my big message here is the technology exists. People are doing it today. There is a big disparity in mega projects and smaller projects in terms of the application of that technology. I completely agree with you that the need to democratize, to make that technology more accessible is super important. I love the tree example. Mendoza, Argentina, a small So they did the exact same thing, but they're using a digital twin of the city to understand where they should put the next trees and to understand the impact that it actually has on the community. How? By sensors, right? The concrete is a very unfriendly material when it comes to trying to keep things cool, right? It heats up and it holds its heat for a long time and then it reflects and it's a nightmare. A tree is an unbelievable friend, if you will, for that. But they want to understand where those green spaces should be. Where is the community? Where are the places that it's needed more than others, right? So again, part of our challenge at Bentley is to try and help democratize this technology, make it available to every project, because it can be. It absolutely can be.
I was really pleased that we brought in nature-based solutions, but also the role of technology and humans in the nature-based solutions. And maybe that's something we can also note to take forward, right? There's a lot of talk around nature-based solutions, but how much conversation is there about exactly the role of technology in those nature-based solutions in order to optimize them? I'm going to ask one other thing to be noted by the rapporteur. We talk about a lot of gaps. We talk about protection gap. We talk about the funding gap and the adaptation gap. I wonder if there's a technology gap, and I wonder whether that should be taken forward too. And if we talk about closing that gap, and that gap could be, it's not how we want to define it, but maybe bringing the technology to the projects at a local level rather than just the mega ones. How do we make that happen? I don't know that we need to answer it now, but I think that is the challenge, because it's easy to say we're going to democratize it. I heard Yoda talk earlier about things that are commercially unviable. And it might be the case that what we need to do is have orders of magnitude cost reduction in technology, and maybe that's on its way in order to make it accessible. I'm going to ask the whole, please, Yoda, come in.
And I wanted to make a point about why it's commercially inviable, because it's the perception of it, as was mentioned. It's also that you make people visible, you can't ignore them.
Mm-hmm.
So data is so important as an enabler, because being able to stand at a bridge or at a location and see where did you come from, where were you going, and how long did it take you? If you ask 10,000 people that over the next month, which we're reducing down through remote sensing now,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to do that more rapidly through some technology tools. But I think it's simply just being able to understand and be able to quantify. At least we deal with that issue in rural areas. I think it is very similar in cities with the kind of sub-city elements of vulnerable populations there as well. And I think I also want to mention that one of the things about the commercial viability of something is that someone's willing to pay.
Yeah.
And so we pay for a lot of things that are non-commercially viable. We paid, Uber was 10 years and never broke even, and there was money pumped in there. So we know that there's money. I think it's also thinking around how do we get the collaborations between those who are bottom up, those organizations, entities, communities that have the information, that have the experience, and then tie them with the entities like Chris mentioned, with Bentley and others who are stepping in and thinking around these issues and looking at it as a potential user. Maybe not now, but in the next 10, 20 years, if more people are using technology to address these issues, there's a crowding in, there's a flight to quality, and then also making sure that the community is in the center of it, so the technology is not reading, the AI is not, our tools are not reading something that's not reflective of what's actually happening on the ground. And I think part of it is that data equity issue, which is a big issue. We mapped waterways that don't exist currently on maps of Africa. That means that people are having an experience that is not being recorded in the data, which therefore is not going to be recorded in any generative AI or any technology that is on the layer of visualization and insights. So I think some of that is also these kinds of conversations. What data are you missing? What data are you missing? Do I have data that maybe could be available to us? To others to use, and creating more of those pathways for that to happen. And then also with the bundling, then it becomes easier to be able to fund those things. It's hard to speak to a funder or anyone to say, build one bridge, build one road. But if we're able to bundle those roads, those bridges into a more networked approach, that we're starting to really get to the nugget. And then layer in there, what are the climate smart ways that address the needs? And also being honest about the fact that some parts are not going to be perfectly climate smart for the needs of populations, and what do we do there as well?
Can I just, you said technology gap, I challenge that a little bit. I acknowledge there is a technology gap, I don't think that's the big impediment. I think technology is moving very, very quickly, and that's not the challenge is change management. The challenge is status quo. The challenge is we're doing it this way because we've always done it this way. To create a digital twin in the way that I described it requires massive process change to the engineering services companies, construction companies, and most importantly, to the owners and operators of infrastructure, which typically are governments, right? This is the challenge, I think. And the reason the mega projects work, because there's exposure. The community gets to see them. They get to yell at their politicians. They're affected more by mega projects because the roads get closed or what have you, right? So there's more communication. But the collaboration is so key to this.
So if you're right, that the technology gap is not caused by inequity or affordability, but rather by visibility, then maybe your point about bundling becomes key. That we should move from individual projects to portfolios of projects to give them the scale and the visibility to attract funding and also to attract the technology at scale. Maybe that's a thought to take forward.
I think that's right, but also to recognize these are systems of systems. So the impact of one affects another. So you do have to have a holistic view. For sure. You do have to step back and look at the entire picture, because just optimize, and this is the problem, this is the challenge. Most infrastructure today is managed in silos. The water company manages the water network. The electric company manages the electric network. Who's looking at the interactions between those, right? It has to change, because climate change affects them all. And it affects them differently, and then there are consequences for the different systems. And if you don't have that holistic view, you're in trouble.
I know that I said I promised someone in the room, and anybody else, if you want to catch my eye, one more over there. But you, sir, could you just name affiliation and question, please? I hope so. It's coming to you. And then we need another mic at the front just immediately afterwards, please. Oh.
Hi, my name is Sagar. My interest is supply chains. So the lady earlier, someone earlier was talking about Sierra Leone and the floods and climate change. And for me, this is a bit too simplistic, because 20 years in the global south, we didn't have terms like climate change. We were talking about it in terms of the reality of what's going on. But when I look at something like this, I was like, well, hold on, what happened? What caused the floods? So I'm going back at it like it's a supply chain. And a quick 2-second Google search, looking at Sierra Leone, the one thing I'm looking at is, for the floods to happen, the forests had to be removed. And the mining had to be removed as well. The minerals had to be removed. The one thing I'm looking at is, what's the minerals that were dug up for the forest to be removed and mass floods happening and devastating the people's lives? The minerals I'm looking at is minerals like copper and nickel and cobalt and bauxite and lithium. What are all those minerals relevant for? All of those minerals are relevant, in addition to the fossil fuels, they're relevant for going green. They're relevant for wind turbines and solar panels and electric cars. So if we're really looking at it like the bigger picture, not smaller than the width of my nose, for me, the real supply chain holistically is saying the supply chain isn't from Dusseldorf to London, it's all the way from Congo to London. And are we really asking, when we're talking holistically, are we really going to Congo or Haiti or somewhere in Northeast India and saying, where did these resources come from? Why you got floods all the time? Okay, let's follow the supply chain. Why are we planting 1,000 trees in an area that 5 years ago, one of our conglomerates decided to strip mine and take out all the resources? This is a problem here. Are these climate solutions really solutions, or actually are there impediments on those countries? And how are we actually going to bring the people, the indigenous people, or the people from the global south, not to be on the periphery outside of these buildings, but actually at the table, on the chairs, to actually say, You guys are in the UK. I'm right in the thick of it in Ghana or Nigeria. You ain't got a clue what's going on because my resources are to mine up so you can have an electric car. Thank you.
Appreciate the comment. Could you just go forward one, if that's possible, please? If you keep your interventions brief, and Karen, keep an eye on the clock for me, please.
Hi, my name is Marilla Hart. I recently completed a Master's in Sustainability at Anglia Ruskin University. Just a few points, I'll try and keep them brief. It's interesting to hear about technology and digital twins. I think technology will only look at what you ask it to look at, and Eniola did mention this about local knowledge, but I think it's really important when looking at adaptation to look at indigenous knowledge and local experts, ecologists, and people who are really, really in touch with the local environment, because they may know it better than even AI can understand it, and be receptive to the changes and what is needed. If we are going down these huge computer models and all the sensors, and I'm sure there's lots and lots of advantages of them, but do they not all take critical minerals and also have a huge carbon footprint of their own as you're producing and keeping alive these digital twins? So is that something to bear in mind? And as we want a just green transition, if we have to use all these microchips in every little sensor, also how are these going to be disposed of in the future? And can we learn from using them so we don't need to continue using them, because we get an idea of maybe then re-educate people for more resilience in the future. Also, just quickly thinking about the most vulnerable, not everyone is part of a big infrastructure. So if you've got a small housing association who want to retrofit their homes, this is something I did my dissertation on, they won't necessarily have access or the knowledge or the experts that you will in a much larger housing association, for example. And that could be the case for all sorts of providers or small landlords or individuals who need to do work on their home. And I think without funding for adaptation and without legislation that mandates it, it's not always in the interest of everybody to do it or within their abilities. So thinking about agency at all levels of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we just go forward to the gentleman here, and then we'll go to the back. We'll take two more quick interventions, and then we've got about 10 minutes to let the panel respond, if that's okay.
Thank you. Jessica Wonberg, the CEO of the Global Resilience Partnership, one of the very proud partners of the Resilience Hub. So I almost want to respond to that, but I'm not up there, so I'm not gonna. I think you raised a lot of important issues. The complexity of it, how you navigate complexity is very important. And there's one thing, especially working in cities. In my career, I've been involved in a few urban projects. I've started initiatives and so on in the Global South. And one thing that comes up, and it hasn't been mentioned here, but I think the visibility that Eniola is mentioning could deal with it, is corruption. And the way corruption is sort of embedded into all decision-making processes. Just love to hear some kind of reflection on how can we use data, how can we use arts, how can we use the technology to surface that, and how can we engage with the mayors and so on to deal with the issues. I've been to Freetown. I mean, it's an awesome initiative there, but it's complex as heck because there are so many vested interests in what's going on. Thank you.
No, thank you. Can we just get the mic to go right to the back? Sorry thanks, Jasper, for the one more intervention.
Thank you. Monica Tamirano, I'm a specialist in public-private partnerships and system thinker, but my question is, seems that you're doing great advances on having those partnerships to shape those projects and so forth, but how can we move that collaboration and that system thinking much more upstream when we do plans and that public-private cooperation too? Because yeah, I'm a bit, it's quite frustrating to see how much money goes to do master plans that are perfectly from an engineering point of view, but have no consideration of value capturing or community needs. So how are you working to create those capacities in developing countries of that new type of, I don't know, would that be an engineer or a financier or I don't know, what would that be?
Thanks, Monica. I'm going to hold it for a second if that's all right, but if there's time, we'll come to you. So much there. Supply chains, the carbon footprint of the technology itself, the need to move up the upscale from the community to get them into the master plans, and of course the corruption topic. Guys, pile in wherever you want to go. Cassie first, please.
Well, I can start with the last one first, maybe, just on this very kind of city focus. I mean, you've given a great example there of really the power that cities have to make change. Actions like master planning, regulations, regeneration of neighbourhoods often is where cities can have the biggest change and the biggest long-term impact on a city. And I think for a few of the questions there of kind of saying, what's the impact of these actions that you're talking about, for example, the tree planting programme in one city? Well, the action is also to be able to embed that into longer-term thinking. And so longer-term thinking is great, right? You put it into a master plan, you put in climate resilience, you put in mitigation, you have net zero carbon building codes, you have your flood risk mapping. Just a point on infrastructure and climate action earlier, I won't name the cities, but I know 2 cities spent a lot of money on new cycling infrastructure all along the harbour. 2 years later, it was underwater. So there's something about good planning with climate risks built in order to just have a good long-term investment. The thing I would say that I think came up in many of the questions is that balance between long-term planning and putting some of the requirements on developers, on finance, on some of the big institutions within cities, and then ensuring visibility of short-term projects that are solving short-term and immediate issues that citizens are facing, that communities are facing. And I think, please don't take any of our points. I think it's saying some of those are more important than others. There's a sweet spot, there's a balance to be struck there, and of course that should be context specific. So I don't think it's a choice of one or the other. Really, in the face of a climate crisis, we should be doing both. We should be kind of ratcheting up both of those immediate and longer term actions.
Anybody else want to come in with responses to what was asked? Farah first, and then Chris, go on.
Yeah, I guess coming back on a few things that have come up in the room, and one of the things around what we see working with arts and culture is that Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous practices and all the things that we hold culturally are also technologies that don't require the digging up of minerals, that don't require us to think about it purely in this very digital way. And I think that that's quite often dismissed. But it's also like that's where people's trust also lies. In a lot of the work that I do, quite often. Can you hear me at the back? Okay, great. Sorry, thank you. So, those technologies and knowledges that already exist are trusted within communities. They are what is already there, and the problem is that they don't get that same funding. They're not valued by the markets. So, when we have markets that are not built to value that, it means that those things are dismissed and those things are tossed aside, and people don't always necessarily trust in these like digital approaches, because of the various different reasons. I mean, some of the Indigenous people that I met and worked with in Australia last year were very, not wanting to use certain technologies and certain digital practices because of the colonial history of Indigenous knowledges being stolen. And that is something that we have to really think about, and it's something that even the IPCC recognised is the colonial legacies that have built the infrastructures that we currently live under and how they keep contributing to the climate crisis. So we need to creatively dismantle those things and really think about how we bring communities along in a way which reshapes our values. What do we care about? What is our purpose? And then how do we build that trust together in a collaborative way, which isn't just reinforcing the same things over and over again.
I'm really pleased you brought in trust, and I'm going to ask Chris to respond to what he heard, but there is this tension between trust and technology. But Chris,
I completely agree. There absolutely is, and for good reasons. I also agree with the comment that technology is useful in application, needs to be applied by a person. And I absolutely recognize some of the challenges of circularity with respect to the gentleman's comments about materials needed, I think material science is a huge area that we have to invest in and create technology from things that are more circular than perhaps we have today. And that's sort of the unintended consequences part that I was talking about, right? You solve one person's problem and you create another for another person. And so back to having to think about things holistically. But I would just say in my last comment, and again, back to involving community and whatnot, when I say sensors, I mean them in a somewhat of a broad term. We all are carrying sensors in our pockets right now, every person in this room. And there's a tremendous amount of information that's available to help people already better design, better build, better operate infrastructure, create better community. So some of this isn't about necessarily going and sticking new sensors on things that where they aren't. It's taking advantage of information that may be inaccessible, but may be available, or may appear to be inaccessible, and perhaps is unavailable, but shouldn't be. And so again, this is another fraught with personal information protection, but again, we don't need a whole bunch of new sensors in a lot of applications to get information that would help us build stronger and better communities, frankly.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to do something risky. I've got a wrap, but I'm more interested in what people in the room have to say. So can we just do one very quick point at the back, one very quick point at the front, and then Leona, as soon as you get a chance to respond to stuff on the floor, then maybe I'm going to give you the last word. So, please.
Hi there, I'm Lydia. I work for a charity here in the UK that deals with finance and sustainability called Accounting for Sustainability. I'm curious about getting buy-in from all of these different communities that each of you work with, whether it's a professional community or a community based in Africa or, wherever it might be, at every single level. There's upskilling obviously to be considered, but also importance placed on sustainable transitions and sustainable thinking and getting use of technology and things like that. It's a lot of work, so I'm just very curious about what efforts are going into that and where you might be seeing those challenges and needs arising. Thanks.
Thank you. Can we just bring the mic to the very front here on my right-hand side to the left? And the reason that I want to hear from the floor is not because we're going to have the answers in the last minute, but because there's another panel and they'll be socializing afterwards, and I want to get these points out. So,
thank you very much for your contributions, really thought-provoking. My name is Alida Gersley. I'm an emeritus academic in the Arts for Change. For many, many years, delighted to hear about the Coventry project, which of course builds on about 50 years of Arts for Change in the environment within the city. So there's one issue around how to establish community strengths, which have been there, and practices which have been there and cannot be ignored. We are going to reinvent the wheel in terms of the urgency and the IT systems that are available. But I'm a specialist in the efficacy of word-of-mouth communication within the building of communities. I haven't heard anything about by word of mouth. And yes, there are big issues on change management. Issues on change management have been and can be effectively resolved through the appointment of change coordinators, decision-making change coordination, and have been managed very well in many different projects. And so I'd like to say, can we please bear in mind the role of the building of trust through word-of-mouth communication? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good point to end with, I think. Anyhow, rather than ask you to wrap it up, what I'm going to suggest is there's so much there to cover, and that we break for the next panel, but that we all stick around and find the people from the floor, and we're here to be engaged with, but we want to hear what you have to say too. So I'm going to suggest, wait for it, brief round of applause for the panelists. I'm going to ask the panelists to step down so the next panel can to get mic'd up. So round of applause for the panelists, please. And just think we might talk these things. As we do the handover, Marcia's going to do the next panel, but I wanted to bring one of the panelists up first. somebody that I've had the pleasure of collaborating with on many occasions. AY Young, I'd like him to come to the stage, and I think we have a brief video by way of introduction, just to keep things a little bit fresh and mix things up. If our AV team could play the AY video, that would be good. And then AY is going to do a short performance just to re-energize the room between the panels.
A local hip-hop artist makes an international name for herself. He is the first artist to power his concert with 100% renewable energy.
It is a real honor to recognize Mr. A.Y. Young, the founder of Battery Tour.
Incredible, can't wait for you to see this. The United Nations is now throwing its support behind him.
Mr. Young has made a big impact in his young life, born in 1991. He's a singer-songwriter, a dancer, producer, entrepreneur, and sustainability advocate. He's staged and performed more than 800 concerts. He was named by the United Nations recently.
I need a mic, they say.
As one of 17 youth world leaders of the world. The only individual selected for that honor from the United States.
I'm looking forward to stimulating this local economy further, bringing entrepreneurs together, bringing businesses together, bringing the world together so we can make some change.
I'm here to listen. Don't ask me questions. Tell me what to do. Give me ideas.
Mission is to bring down these silos, these barriers, and build bridges to power collective action by bringing everyone together. It's going to be incredible. My work plans in 3 different phases. I'm going to make an album powered 100% by renewable energy.
Right now, AY Young is working on an album based off the 17 United Nations goals. Major stars like Tech9 and Billie Eilish will collaborate.
Be the one who plays Tech9, and I am part owner of Strange Music, and right now a part of Gold Laundry. Let's go.
There are 700 million people that are still living in poverty.
Whole premise of your music is about collaboration. It's about getting excited. It's about going across the finish line.
Anyone can disagree. That everyone needs to have access to energy, water, food. We're all these outlets for change.
What's up, guys?
Mic check. 2. Mic check. Oh, you can turn me down a little bit. You guys doing good? Say yeah. Yeah. Okay, can we get Daniel back up? I want to try something I've never done before. Can we make some noise for your moderator? He's been so great. What's up, guys? I'm in the middle, obviously, this project called 17, right? Where I'm kind of uniting the world, like every facet of humanity, because I think in order to tackle these goals, like somebody said, like we all have to come together, right? Government, not yet, you can pause it. You know, government. That was good though. He was there, my DJ on point. Government, artists, companies, organizations, nonprofits, right? The private sector, hedge funds, right? Asset. We all have to, as humans, come together to tackle these 17 goals, right? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, so that's why I think we can change the world, and I really love partnerships. And so, I've made one song for each goal and teamed up with a major artist and a company that sponsors, so I own the music, so I can donate all the proceeds to organizations that do the work, right? We can power impact. I call it music for impact, yeah? And I started with the first song I started when I was making this thing was Goal 17. So come on up, my favorite.
Well, don't your favorite song.
Okay.
Go on.
So here's the deal. It features a band called The Head and the Heart. Okay, I love that. You guys like The Head and the Heart? Rivers and roads. Okay, and the idea is like adding Paul McCartney by the end of the year, we hope, and Peter Gabriel. We do not have Paul McCartney today. Okay, and I was just with Peter recently. He's not here right now. Just breaking that to you guys. But we have Daniel. Okay, so we're gonna split the room in half. I love how you do this. Okay, I'm gonna teach you the song. Okay, it's We Can Change the World. So you guys just say, we can. We can change the world. We can change the world.
Oh, let's see what come get the change the world side.
Yeah, I don't need to be mic'd. I got a terrible voice.
Okay, roll the track. They're ready, bro, to change the world.
Come on, you guys get some energy here?
Come on,
they're gonna stand out.
Hey, give us a little fire.
And I can't find a reason not to give up. It's gonna take teachers, leaders, dreamers, let's go. Hey, hey,
now the music.
always take
Music up. Just this down a little bit. You guys ready? Here we go. Go.
We can change the world. Sing it out, baby. Sing it out, go. We can change the world.
That's good, guys. It's gonna take all of us to do this, right? To change the world. Say,
We can change the world.
it's your song, guys. Hey.
So we got to come together now.
Shake your hand.
Got to come together now. Within your ignorance, that this is for.
You guys good? You guys okay?
Cause it's about time we home and realize that we are one and the same, unique and one of a kind, right? Brighter days ahead when we join together. Put your best foot forward, go and make an effort. They call me AY, spoke to Akon. Walking gate when you get the grapevine. Let's have a great time.
That's good, guys. Stay on ready to keep it. All right. Okay. Almost help me out here.
We can change the world. Sing it out loud. We can change the world.
You got a good voice. Sing it out. Go.
We can change the world.
Hit it, girl.
We got to come together now, baby. Just come together now. We got to come together now. We got to come together now. We got to come together. We got to come together.
I think you're on. You stay on stage, man. I think Mark Fear has got the next cut it from here. I don't know how the panel's going to top that.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and fantastic to have you, AY.
Good job, Daniel.
Featuring Daniel.
Dude, I really wanted Paul McCartney, though. You did a good job for church. It's okay.
Yes, I can. We're waiting for the next panel to get Mike Wire. But in the meantime, very excited. I'm sure everyone has very high energy now after this wonderful moment and great message as well. So we are here, as we heard at the beginning of the session and in the previous panel, to really celebrate the Resilience Hub as a platform that allows those voices, those opportunities, those solutions to bring many actors together. But as well, we're celebrating the third year of the campaign Race to Resilience. So why is important? We want to bring a little bit of a bigger picture now. We had questions in the first panel about, great, these opportunities are shaping a local level, and how do we scale them? How do we bring them to actually be true process across many different systems? We have examples on infrastructure, but as well, similar cases are on food and agriculture, on water, on health systems, etc. So what do we learn from these? What are the transformations? So we want to have a little bit of a focus on that transformation opportunity on this segment. And in the next segment, we're going to have a much even bigger ambition picture. How do we take the opportunity forward? So happy to welcome Jesper and Shanaz, please. Thank you.
I've been given the mic.
Okay, great. No problem. Super good. So then we have Jesper Hornberg, CEO of Global Resilience Global Resilience Partnership, as you all know. Shanaz as well, Director, South North, and AY, which is coming in a second. I guess I sit here. So perhaps while we wait the AY starts, we can have a little bit of as well a focus. Why we are so keen to understand the journey that we're going. It is definitely a journey, moving from recognizing those critical solutions, those opportunities, elevating the voices and shaping the processes. It's an opportunity, it's a journey that we are. Not necessarily we are at the point where we need to be, but we have learned and we have influenced and we have moved, in this case, the options. So, want to start with AY, that we had a wonderful moment with you just now. So, from your side, from your perspective, adaptation and resilience today require a certain element of disruption, willingness to innovate, and to enable the kinds of transformations that we need to thrive. With your work as the flagship artist from the Battery Tour, how do you see music being a disruptive force for change and action, especially on the new generation of actors?
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, you guys, obviously music's a universal language, right? We were all just singing together. You know, it can be a vehicle to drive the solutions and to motivate and inspire people to take an action. That's kind of how I've used music and how I've seen it work. So, I mean, aside from obviously doing the Battery Tour and each concert raising money and funding and building and promoting and developing sustainable solutions, I mean, we brought energy to over 18 countries. That was before I became young leader. So I've seen music give people food, water, power. That's impact. You know, and I will definitely say this last year has been interesting. We did the Grammys. We just did Rock in Rio. That was 80,000 people. We did Times Square. There's a lady that saw me in Times Square. Hey, we did the first ever. What's up? We did the first ever renewable energy power concert in the history of Times Square last year, right? So disrupting, you know, an industry that's typically fossil fuel led and inspiring and showing people that, you know, you can do it carbon neutral, you can do it differently, and you can use the music for impact and not just to make money or be famous, right? I think, yeah.
Fantastic. So disruption, it is feasible and it's needed in order to really achieve the transformations that we need for a resilient planet and for the benefit of the people. And in that sense, we recognize that over the past 2 decades, there has been several efforts, several action on adaptation across the world. It's not really new, but it's really advanced and has also, let's say, covered new areas. Has been a growth on learning and as well on delivery and implementation. But there are still perhaps some challenges. How do we ensure that regional priorities are shaping these adaptation actions? And could you share how to best bring these regional priorities forward? Shanaz.
I'm used to holding one and thinking.
Is it on?
My check.
Thank you, anyway.
Should take that too. Okay, so just some, I think what I'd like to do is just take a step back from the question and ground it very much in the reality of what's happening on the ground. So I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. We went through quite a bit of, we came out of apartheid, and still the country is facing many, many challenges. And in the broader African context, I think that's the reality of most countries. And added to that is the climate stresses. And with that reality, how do communities respond? And how do we start looking at those responses and scale them and look at the catalytic levers that can be triggered for impact? And often in the global spaces, it's easy to talk about mitigation because you can okay, I'm an engineer, so when I say easily, it's probably not easy for everyone. But it's easy to measure your carbon reduction and all those things. So often, and I'm not, because I came in a bit late, but somebody mentioned that the technology is there, but yeah, sorry, I just lost my train there. But it was to do with the technology that's there, but it's not being reaching the places where it needs to be. So in terms of adaptation, communities are adapting. Otherwise, otherwise, most communities would not be there. And they're adapting long before we even had words for adaptation. So often when you're engaging at the very local level and you ask communities what they're doing, there's no word in their indigenous language for adaptation. Does that mean you then can't measure adaptation because there's no word for it? So I think the challenge, and therein lies the hope, is that those who are trying to measure adaptation, and it's often the funders and the donors based in the global north, the challenge is that that capacity is built to start understanding what adaptation looks like beyond a matrix. I get we need the matrices, and I think it's part of the continuum, but at some point, we need to shift from the very quantitative data that's needed to unlock funding into the spaces where somebody brought up stories, into the spaces where lived experiences count just as much as a number. And I think until we get there, it's always going to be conversations about what's the risk profile, how do we de-risk it, and yet adaptation is happening as we're having all these conversations. So I'd like to challenge us also, because we've started at South North. So another story of adaptation and resilience. We started off more than 11 years ago with 11 people, where we were completely in the mitigation space because that was what everybody was interested. We now 120 people completely in the adaptation space. And it's been a huge, huge learning for us as an organization in the global south, and often needing to challenge the status quo. And so we say, what does radical partnerships look like? What does radical collaboration look like? And yes, we need to disrupt the systems, but in a radical way. And if you look at, I'm talking a lot, but okay. And if you look at the root word of radical, it actually means going back to the root. So more and more, that's our approach. And yes, we get pushback from many of our donors, and we often asking them, just give us a bit of space to show you the results. And thus far, we've been quite successful. We've managed to challenge many systems. We're even at a point where we're asking the donor, where the donor says, we will take the risk on passing money down to the community. And we say, fine, we'll take the risk because often that risk is only about a trust deficit. So all these systems are in place for money to flow, but to address what is seen as a trust deficit. So for me, AYM, it's about radical, it's about disrupting the systems and looking for those catalytic entry points. Because scaling, you can't just keep scaling this way. You can't. You need to be catalytic in how you do it. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic, Shanaz. You touched really wonderful points, especially regarding it is not a one-way, it's a two-way, meaning, yes, there are solutions on the ground that are being shaped, but the way of helping to deliver them also requires a shift of mind across the board. The radical collaborations, the engagement with different actors, but also investors and et cetera, on the ecosystem of actors. And I think that is the beauty of the resilience hub, that they bring all these actors together so that it can better enhance that understanding, showcase the evidence of the opportunities, but also move the boundaries of what we have right now as active so that we can create a new reality. And in that opportunity, Jasper, moving on one point, very critical point Shanaz mentioned in regards to access to finance. Access to finance is critical to accelerate adaptation action. What are the opportunities to accelerate finance for innovative community-sourced solutions that especially the Global Resilience Partnership has been working on?
Thank you. Mic check, mic check. I just did what you
Yes,
did.
you
That's
did.
really good. Is it on? Is it on? I can't see it. Hello?
Mine's on, but yours not. I don't think yours is on.
Mine's on.
Want to give him the handheld mic? So we just keep it rolling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good. That's all the really is. Okay, cool. Thanks. Thank you. Good question. I just quickly want to say, I think Shanaz's point on adaptation has been happening for a long time. We just haven't thought of it that way. Is so very true. And the same applies to finance and how you actually get finance into locally led solutions. Because if you are if I can just call it an entrepreneur, you're in the global south and you're trying to start a small business, farm, buy seed, buy whatever. Without us, what's your way of finding money? Well, you go to your family. You do, in Kenya, we call it the harambe. You collect money collectively and you pool it, sort of. You have round tables and so on. So that's one way of getting finance. Now, it's not enough to actually scale money, so we need to see a lot more funding coming in here. In order to do that, we need to look, I think, at the risk. The risk profile of these smallholder farmers, for example, is that we look at them and we think they're very risky. So if I'm going to lend them money, I'm going to go with whatever rate there is, 25-30% per annum. And that's a low interest rate in many countries in Africa. Now, if I have a business in, let's say, London, and I have to pay 30% per annum in interest rate, my cost of capital is way too high to do anything useful with it. It's going to totally erode my profits and my ability to reinvest and build my business, employ more people, and expand. So that's one thing that needs to be fixed. And that brings me to blended finance. We need to find ways to get really cheap money or even free money into the system to trigger, catalyze new innovations. It's not just that we give them money. We need to do a lot of the other things that Shanaz was already mentioning. That's very important. But they need to sort of get started. And then we need to have ways to allow them cheaper finance, lower cost of capital. Say you take some grant money and you blend it with some commercial money, and then voila, if you start with 30, you're at 15%. I'm simplifying this a lot, but the principle of it is that you are de-risking it in the eyes of the lender of commercial funding. And in reality, I think the actual risk is actually lower. So it's looking at what is the risk actually. If you take Uganda, a project we at URP have been working on for a long time, the repayment rate of coffee farmers is 98%. 98%. That's a heck of a lot better than the standard kind of credit card repayment rate in the UK. So why is the credit card interest rate in the UK lower than what it is for these farmers in Uganda? The terms are about the same. we're talking 3-6 months. I could go on, but we have good questions coming, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesper. And in that sense, the different exercises that has been already advanced through the network of the Global Resilience Partnership are critical as good examples that we can continue bringing them forward. So anyway, in your work on Project 17, what do you see as critical gaps still around engaging youth into specific areas of resilience? And what would be your one call to action based on that?
The critical gaps.
In regards of
engaging youth.
resilience, yes, to advance resilience, or to connect with resilience.
Yeah. I think with resilience, even sustainability in some words, or some cases, or regeneration, some of these terms, with the general youth, I think there's a lack of education. I mean, even with artists and music and a lot of people, as I bring, I used this story recently because I did this festival called Rock in Rio, right? 80,000 people. And I was before a band called Evanescence, and they had a band called Scorpion. Scorpion's like a big rock band. No one's saying anything. They're cool. And then there was Ed Sheeran after that. He's really good. I'm thinking now. Okay, so anyway, I was like before all of them. And then incredible music, right? I mean, gosh, it's like Ed Sheeran. I'm like singing that every song. I'm thinking out loud. But at the end of it all, I realized I was the only artist at Rock in Rio with the 17 goals behind me. I was the only artist talking about 17 goals or taking an action as an outlet for change. Everything's an outlet. You can use your passion and look at the goals. If you care about gender equality or this or that, you can take an action. There was no one. Scorpion wasn't doing it. Evanescence wasn't getting up there talking about sustainability and regeneration and resilience and how to, bring together the none of them, right? I think with youth, the lack of the education piece. Now, I love the framework of the goals because it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor or a YouTuber or an Instagrammer or an actor or athlete or a hedge fund director or a CSO or whatever. You can look at those goals, think of your passion, and we can all plug in to take an action. So I will say that. What I'm seeing with Project 17 is kind of what I just described. It's kind of getting the world plugged in. And I think that's the beautiful thing about it, is that as it grows and gets stronger, with partners, GM just came on board, and Samsung, and some of these major artists are getting on board, and all this stuff that's going on. I'm finding myself in more places. Even when we did the Peacock Theater in LA, I don't know if you guys been in LA, the Peacock Theater, LA Live, right? We just did it like the first time ever, clean energy, never been done before. And I mean, there was a lot of CSOs and different AG and stuff, but in terms of the people, I don't think there was any youth person that even knew what the goals were. Like, to me, it's shocking. Or the organizations, one thing about about Project 17 that I love so much is like I'm on stage talking about like the resilience of National Wildlife and like the organizations that are doing the work, the solutions that are out there in terms of solar energy, et cetera, and so forth. So, I just see a lack of education with the youth, in general, in terms of like awareness of even what they are, what it means, even what sustainability is. Like some people don't really understand. What does that mean for me?
Correct.
Yeah. So,
Excellent. No, super clear. Yes, your mic is coming off. Sorry.
Is it all over my hair or something?
Yeah,
it's the earring.
I can do a handout, bro.
So it's very helpful, EY, how you mentioned as well that music and all this energy and bringing youth forward can help break some of the information that is not accessible perhaps to them, bring it more familiar to the SDG goals, or expose them to other actors, other stakeholders that are actually advancing climate action so that they can elevate their voices, their ideas, they can also be part of the process. And on that, critical is to engage on scaling, scaling these solutions, these opportunities, bringing different actors forward. So, Shanaz, you mentioned very clearly that all of those solutions are not going to reach the, let's say, the potential that they need if they continue to be isolated. So they have somehow this potential for scaling, for being expanded to other regions or other areas to continue learning what is feasible at the local level. So we recognize that scaling community action is critical to advance adaptation, but what does actually that looks like? What transformations are needed to truly accelerate community adaptation action?
Yes, thank you. That's quite a difficult question. And I think the reason is because all adaptation actions are always context specific. And often when we think of scaling, we think of replicating. And so what we need to do here is to actually disrupt our thinking of scaling and start looking at, and I like to use the word catalyst because a catalyst is something that causes a reaction to go quicker, but it then is taken out and reused. Eventually you need to regenerate, but it's something that can be reused to accelerate and transform a reaction. And so I think the only way forward is to start thinking and disrupting the status quo. And I think you said earlier about, or somebody in the panel, that's what I was trying to get to, that actually we are so set in how we do things from the investment plans to just the normal NDCs and the NAPs. And often you find that your investors and those, your engineers and your implementers are talking completely different languages. And so, and that doesn't even bring into the equation the communities. So what we see more and more is that you, when particularly your NDCs and your NAPs, and those all need to be changed or into investment plans. And those plans need to take into account that when you're considering climate, so often when plans are done and when things are designed, we all taught to look to the back. Like what happened 10 years ago? Okay, the models say this might happen now. And so to shift that, to start looking into the future and not as fortune tellers, but I mean, using your climate scenarios and using that to design your adaptation interventions and match that up with your investments. And so we need to be at a point where any investable project or program has to have in it climate considerations from a risk perspective. Because any good project, whether it's adaptation or mitigation, has to have the climate. Otherwise, I don't think you can tick a good or excellent project box. And that will bring into account the community needs, the context, the implementers, as well as the financiers. And these are the sorts of conversations that need to happen now. And the silos really need to be disrupted and a more systemic view taken on what resilience looks like without all the silos and egos also.
No, fantastic. Thank you, Shanaz. You touched very clear points regarding it is not a formula to scale adaptation. It is about adjusting, reflecting the local realities, but as well expanding those opportunities that can be brought forward, that bringing all those actors together and changing the mind, changing the culture, changing as well the opportunities in regards of accessibility or in regards of decision making. It's critical that radical collaboration. And
can I add to that? Sorry. Also language. Because everybody is speaking different languages and we need a common language to move forward.
Definitely. And actually on that is one as well of the opportunities that the Resilience Hub and the campaign Race to Resilience aims is by bringing all of those together and driving the convergence and the clarity on the different type of actions, opportunities, and approaches so that we can actually accelerate the adaptation that is relevant at the local level while driving the forces at the regional and global levels that are needed for bringing more actors and make the shifts that are needed. So definitely critical as well, the language and ways to improve accessibility of all the actors that are on the table. So Jasper, we spoke about the social, the natural, economic transformations that we need to build resilience. Could you share how we can embrace failure and learning to move forward in this journey?
Thank you. I almost did a mic check again, because twice in one show would be good. I think failure is very important. And I think failure is a power question as well. It's not just that you fail. So there are a couple of different things here to look at. One is, we know, we think, what failure looks like, at least when we look back at the failure. But we don't really know what we're aiming for. We might have project targets and so on, but what is it in this complex system of building resilience, building capacity for adaptation and so on, everywhere, in an inclusive and equitable way? We don't really, we know what that means sort of on the surface, but what does it really mean? We don't know. So that's one problem. What are we aiming for? Are we aiming for a learning journey where we can advance positions? Well, that would be another thing than what we actually traditionally do. The other one is the power dynamics, because the one with money decides what is failure and what is not. And usually that's done when you sort of pull the plug and the funding stops and so on. So we don't have any system in place where funders, and I'm ex-funder myself, as in bilateral funder. We don't have a system where we test something and we end up here or there, and then we take it from there, and then we end up here or there, eventually leading to, this is the learning journey, eventually arriving at somewhere where we've actually achieved something and we can look back and, we learned this. This is how resilience and adaptation looked specifically in this context, as Shanaz was on about. I think that's very important. What we do instead is that we have, did you arrive? Did you hit your targets? Yes, no. Okay, no, fine, you're out. And then there's the power of it as well. If you are rich, if you are me, I'm not rich, but I mean, you know what I mean. If you come from a privileged background like myself, I mean, I've adopted Kenya as my new home country, but I have a relationship with my biological country as well, Sweden. I'm allowed to fail. One, there is a social security net I can fall back on. My parents would probably take me in. My wife might find that a bit weird, but I'm allowed to fail. I know the lingo, I know the language, and I can get by. If you are, and this is the most extreme case, if you are a woman in sub-Saharan Africa, you don't have that luxury. And more importantly, you don't have the margin to even try, because you're one small mistake or external shock away from complete destitution. So failure here is important. We need to build in a buffer to allow for that to happen. We don't need to call it failure, but it needs to be this learning journey so that we can figure out what's happening, what's going on in particular contexts and the dynamics. I mentioned corruption before. All of those things play in.
Thank you very much, Jasper. Fantastic final points, especially regarding this is a journey and how do we learn, adjust, reshift the direction that is needed with those specific lessons, but we do widen the flexibility that we need for building new partnerships, finding new ways of collaboration, identifying the new arrangements that are needed, that are locally relevant, but that can get the traction at the global level. So with that, I would like to appreciate this panel. Thank you very much. Give a big applause. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to invite now a second panel for the event. So you can come back to your seats. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. And when the Race to Resilience was brought forward by COP26, we have Nigel talking come and join me, please, and Mahmoud Mohideen as well. We went into a journey together with the Resilience Hub, of course. And this journey was about how the amazing energy and the many different solutions and actions and ways of collaboration that exist out there can actually get even further and accelerate, especially in integrating many different solutions for adaptation, but bringing that clarity on the opportunity for increasing the resilience of people. Yes, please. Wires, and perfect. We are fine on wires this time. So in this panel, I'm actually extremely excited. I forgot to introduce myself before. I'll do it now. I think you know me anyway. Marcia Toledo, Adaptation and Resilience Director for the Climate Champions team. And I have a pleasure to be now with two of our past champions, Nigel Topping for COP26 and Mahmoud Mohideen for COP27, but also to welcome Mahmoud on his new role as Global Ambassador of the Race to Resilience campaign. So thank you, Mahmoud, for taking on that wonderful role. And today we want to reflect on that, the journey, the opportunity that a campaign that Race to Resilience brings. And also, again, bigger picture, we have COP29 coming, COP30 coming. Very big important moments on policy context for the finance goal, for the global law adaptation metrics, thematic metrics, etc. There's extremely important momentum. The NAP revisions are happening this year. Engagements in regards of the synergies across the convention. So we see the big picture in regards of a policy opportunity, but we also recognize the enormous action on the ground and enormous opportunities to advance and accelerate the implementation of adaptation. But as well, how do we bring this together? How do we bridge, and especially how to bring the evidence forward? So I'll start with Nigel. When the Race to Resilience was launched in COP26, major opportunities were advanced regarding adaptation and resilience action. People were put at the center of climate action, and adaptation was elevated in the agenda. How far do you believe we have come in putting people at the center and bringing adaptation and resilience a part of mitigation and net zero?
Well, I mean, when I reflect on it, I think I'm an example of someone who's had to go through a huge learning journey. We launched the Race to Zero, and some critical friends like Sheila Patel and Emma Boyd said to us, "Yeah, now you've got to do a Race to Resilience," and we kind of kidded ourselves for a while. And, "No, we'll just make the Race to Zero resilient." And everybody who's worked in adaptation resilient knows they've heard that story 1,000 times. Like, we'll get to resilience through mitigation, and I don't know, those are two pretty powerful advocates, but also intellectually, when you actually look into it, it was really compelling. And we wanted to make a big campaign, and we realised, as you were talking about, that you could make it about money, but really it's because of the context-specific nature that we really wanted to make it about lives and livelihoods and try and elevate it. I have to say, how far have we come? I mean, I think we're still a long way behind mitigation, and within mitigation, in a way, the hardest bit of mitigation is food and land, which is the bit which is most associated with adaptation and resilience as well. So I think we're better organised, but I still think some people talked earlier about we've still got a long way to go to bridge the gap between the kind of grassroots nature of a lot of adaptation resilience needs and some of the big institutions like big finance, big government that also need to be kind of design partners. So I think we shouldn't kid ourselves that we've caught up. I think there's more awareness now and a lot more intellect going into trying to figure out and trying to drive some of these radical collaborations.
Thank you, Nigel. And definitely important to recognize those biases or those more, let's say, clarity that exists around the opportunity of mitigation. But even though it could be more challenging to understand, I think we have come a long way to better explain what it means to advance adaptation and what are the opportunities and also the urgencies to bring people at the center of climate action. And so in that sense, Mahmoud, at COP27, we launched the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, and the Race to Resilience partners embraced it because it connected to the type of solutions that they were implemented on the ground. And finance is crucial for advancing climate action, yet adaptation finance remains minimal. What can non-state actors do to further accelerate adaptation finance, and how the Race to Resilience and the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda can support this effort?
Right, thank you so much, and I hope what I'm going to say is not going to be changing the positive tone that we started with today, especially with the good reference of Coventry as a place for art and culture. I lived there for 5 years, and if that happened to Coventry, that really makes me optimistic that change for the positive could happen anywhere. As we know from the history, the whole beautiful city of Coventry was flat bombarded during the Second World War. There was a term even that was mentioned as being Coventrated, this means a flat bombed. I lived there for 5 years, as I mentioned, when I was studying at Warwick, and that was not really the place to share good news from, including arts and messages on resilience and bringing good cities back to be centers of culture. On Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda and the role of cities and finance. Finance is everything when it comes to action. You add that to technology, better data systems, and incentives. And here you have the excellent ingredient mix for change. But finance is even more important for adaptation, for something completely different than mitigation. Because when it comes to mitigation, we know how to measure success or failure. In the case of adaptation, we, as had been the case during all previous COPs, we agree on a target of finance. Should we double, triple, quadruple finance? This is basically a reflection of efforts, assuming that there is no corruption, there is no governance challenges, and if you spend more, you'll get more, and everybody will be happy. Otherwise, we'll be getting in the corner, as mentioned by Nigel, we're stuck in the adaptation resilience part because we didn't do our homework in the decarbonization and mitigation. If we are not doing our homework, as we are not doing it today, we are stuck in the loss and damage. And from that, we know that based on Munich Re, last time I checked the figures, they say it's lost of $250 billion a year of losses. And this incremental increase, half of that is related to nature-induced climate disasters as well. So, and the beauty of resilience and adaptation, it links what we do and what we're not doing in mitigation. It tells us that we need to do better not to get into that corner of losses and damages, but it's the ultimate connector as well between climate agenda, nature and biodiversity, and the development agenda, because when you asked about the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, it's all about development here. It's about infrastructure, it's about settlements, water, food systems. So if you put the SDGs in action, that nice ring, you are covering at least half of the SDGs directly or indirectly. It's all about finance here because we are not getting finance right and very quickly. And I know that it's part of the discussions for COP29 and for COP30. And we need to link the indices to the efforts on finance, and we need to make sure that indices of COP30 are investable by informing them better by COP29. And we cannot really imagine that an NDC will be a good investment strategy or a policy unless we get the investor's voice early on in the drafting. And that's why we are stuck with the earlier versions of NDCs, NDC 1 and NDC 2. But I'll come back to the issue on finance and how to fix it. As an idea, and bringing money as well to the table perhaps at some stage. Yeah.
No, fantastic. Thank you very much for also the very practical lens in regards of the urgency as well that we still need to accelerate action and finance. In that sense, Nigel, in the journey that you went through as a champion and now as a global ambassador as well, what are the most significant lessons you have learned from the process of creating a lasting legacy through the Race to Resilience? And additionally, what gives you hope and optimism for the future of this campaign?
Well, let me give you one lesson that I think we're still very beginning to learn, and what gives me hope. I think that so hopefully this will provoke a bit. This might even annoy a couple of you, but I observe that the adaptation and resilience community is this is a massive generalisation. So I'm looking for the finger wave. Is more uncomfortable engaging with the private sector than the mitigation community, because it comes from more of a community, from a grassroots and a development background, and because it's very, very people-centric, and it's often politically left of centre, so less comfortable with market solutions and business solutions. So I think one of the things that this community will have to learn if we're going to mobilise finance, and Matt will probably say more about this, is to engage with private sector actors and figure out which bits of the adaptation regime, which bits of the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda are amenable through creative collaboration to accessing pools of private capital. Because there's just no solution without accessing a lot of pools of private capital. And I mean, this is a very different and more complex array of solutions than the sort of industrial, technological, where there tends to be, we know green steel, renewable energy, green hydrogen, green steel, tick. Renewables, wind, solar, batteries, grids, tick. They're much less context specific and much more about ramping up technology. So I think I think we're beginning to do that. There's been some very interesting announcement and launches this week around the role of insurance. I know that the champions are having their team strengthened with some secondees from the insurance industry. That's an industry which is responsible for a lot of assets which it needs to deploy, but also has a lot of the tools to help de-risk. Just two examples. The great work that Kathy Boffman's launched with CLR for All paid out to, I think, 50,000 self-employed women in India last month as they went through a heat wave, which meant that they carrying on working would have been really detrimental to their health. So that's really encouraging. Or the 1 Acre Fund, which supports 5 million sub-Saharan African smallholder farmers, and started really supporting them with technical assistance, extension services, and raising working capital. Like, they borrow $85 million a year on the markets to support smallholder farmers buying inputs at a better price on a contract for apples. But they started now offering insurance services, and it's interesting when it's really people-led. You're often surprised. I thought, farmers insurance, it'll be crop protection insurance that they want. Apparently, what those farmers are asking when they could help them access is life insurance and health insurance. I guess because they're seeing their own health and life as the biggest risk to their families. So I think being open to and welcoming collaboration from private sector actors who have some of the skills, and therefore I think seeing finance first as a problem-solving partner and then as a checkbook. I think whenever we objectify finance as a checkbook, it's a kind of dumb, passive objectification, and that's very off-putting if you want to engage people. Hey, dumb, passive, greedy people, come and help us. Not great invite, rather, hey, smart, creative, problem-solving people with access to great resources, come and help us structure this. To your point about having that early. The thing that really gives me hope is I think a much stronger sense of community in the community of the actors, and the fact that the resilience hub, which was just a crazy idea a few years ago, has been established as I think a core part of the architecture of COPs, which I think will help us keep making sure that adaptation and resilience stay high on the agenda at COPs, even as COPs become rightly more about mobilising finance for mitigating adaptation. Last thing I say is when we also, please consider a question, just check your hyperbole when talking about just what a poor relation adaptation and resilience is. One of the things I hear most often is that, adaptation and resilience only gets 15% of all the climate finance. Well, guess what? That's the right percentage. Because Stern somewhere says it's about 350 billion out of 2.4 billion, 15%. So just recognise that that's the wrong calculation. It's not enough, but it's not the wrong percentage. The whole pie needs to get much bigger. And I think sometimes it's the danger of a sort of allocation versus mitigation fight when the whole pie needs to get much bigger.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nigel, for that hope and also the clarity of the lessons and also the evolution of the community of actors. That is the critical, I would say, richness of both the Race to Resilience and the Resilience Hub as platforms to bring everyone together. But at the same time, you pointed that we have the opportunity to be more evident the role of the private sector, the partnership with businesses, with financiers. We have the potential. There are really solutions happening that are, let's say, very much targeting to different audiences for mechanisms to relieve the, in this case, heat wave or other stresses so that life can continue. But at the same time, the Sharm el-Sheikh agenda and the Race to Resilience this year have prioritized an agenda on business and are forming the Business Adaptation Leaders Group under the Sharm agenda with many of the partners that are already working with businesses on the Race to Resilience can help make more clear those evidence, those opportunities, those actions, so that the community as well are not working so separated from bringing and bridging the in this case, the final landscape of solutions that can be needed. So Mahmoud, in that sense, what is the biggest opportunity for the Race to Resilience campaign in the next 2 years to further bring the let's say, leadership of businesses in regional adaptation?
Well, the discussion had been very much at a 40,000 kind of feet level to global, and all of these interesting reports talking about the huge gaps. And then when we check them and trying to make sense out of them, there are lots of challenges when it comes to numbers. And Nigel gave an example of that. If we believe some of these reports, we need $400 billion a year for developing economies and emerging markets, excluding China. If we focus more on a region, Africa, the figures last year are very much telling me that we need to know more about what we're talking about. The flows of funds are around 11 billion. NDCs from Africa are asking for 55 billion. Independent estimates, like by unit, are telling us that we need no less than 110 billion for Africa. Others are saying 200 billion in the middle. Well, this is really confusing. That for people who deal with numbers and those who are working in finance and investment, they would appreciate more accuracy in that. When you are asking for a question about how many people around the world, you'll get a good estimate with a margin of error of 1 to 2%. Global GDP, we know it's 100 trillion last year, give or take 5%. But when it comes to all of these figures I just mentioned, that the discrepancy is in 100%, 200%, it's not the usual 2 to 5%. And this is something to do with the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, if we take it seriously, because it starts from communities, from localities, from your neighborhood, from the cities, the coastal areas, that if you happen to live there, from even when we talk about deforestation, desertification, these are, at the end of the day, the damage starts with some neighborhoods and impacting neighborhoods. So this is basically the kind of bottom-up approach that would be required, not for the sake of being more inclusive or more democratic, but even if you just care nothing but about money and finance and better investments, you need to get the NDCs of the third generation, tackling matters at this local community level, and then you aggregate that to national, and then regional, and then global. Otherwise, I gave you some numbers, and don't follow the number, just follow the hierarchy. So I'll not bother you with any more figures about infrastructure requirements needing 56. Are they really 56 or 70 or 40? Who knows? But anyways, the hierarchy are the following: infrastructure, coastal zones, river floods, early warning and social protection, agriculture, and health. This is if I'm spelling out the majority of the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda into potential areas of business. And you can see not just in infrastructure, but the rest of the issues like coastal zones and riverfronts are again about infrastructure. You see infrastructure being repeated. 80 to 90% are on the investments. And here, I like to alert you to a very interesting study. And again, I appreciate the reference to corruption. But here it's not just about corruption, it's even about weak governance. Weak governance in infrastructure projects for climate